Well, Adam, we are moving along in the season. Disney Plus. We got the Space Babies. We reviewed it. I was kind of hard on it. I watched it again. I still agree with my original opinion.
You did
Uh,
it again?
I feel like I've watched The Devil's Chord. I have watched at least four times now
Oh, wow.
because I
Wow,
think I watched
that's
it initially because I wasn't sure if we're gonna if we were gonna cover it. So I want to be ready just in case. I watched it. Then I watched it with my wife because I didn't watch it with her the first time. Then I watched it again, and then I watched it a final time so I could prepare for this recording. So like I've seen
that's
this episode a lot, which is probably a good
that's
thing. I'll have a very well-rounded opinion on all of this stuff. But yeah, this
that's
is probably the most I've
impressive.
watched in an episode of Doctor Who in a long time.
That's wild. Someone just asked me, like, how many times do you watch an episode in preparation? And I'm like, well, once, maybe twice. I that is me. So the fact that you have four under your belt, that's impressive. Did your wife's opinion, because I know she wasn't too high on Space Babies, how did the Devil's Chord strike her before we dive into it?
She said she liked it.
Okay.
I
Okay.
think I think some of the elements that she didn't like are the same ones that are probably going to be the divider or like the ones where people disagree.
Yeah.
I'll be curious to hear you. I don't think you and I have really talked much about this other than our little brief,
Right.
talking about it
Yeah.
last episode, but we haven't gotten into details. So I'm not even sure kind of your overall opinions on some of the stuff. I'm really curious to hear moments. There's moments where I'm kind of like, that was kind of weird or whatever. So we'll definitely cover the moments and see where we differ. But I think in the end, it was a pretty good episode for me, and my wife agreed that it was an improvement from Space Babies.
I think there might be a twist at the
That's possible.
end.
Okay, so we are going to talk about the Devil's Chord, and we don't always do this, but like I feel like sometimes I like to do this where you kind of just go down the info. So this is a
Yeah, read it.
15th Doctor story.
Go
Companion
for
is
it.
Ruby. It's featuring the Beatles. Uh, Spoilers. The main enemy is Maestro, and the main setting is London. And February 11th, they say 1963, which is a day after my birthday. Not 1963, I'm not that old, but February 11th is a day after my birthday. So it would have been cooler if it fell on February 10th. This was also written by Russell T Davies, which I was saying I think he's just going to write everything. Quickly realized no, Moffat writes the next one, so I'm already wrong about that. But maybe between the two of them, they write everything this season. Have they announced a
I
third writer?
I've heard rumors that Moffat has more than one under his belt already. So outside of that, though, I think it might be just the two of them.
And we can talk about that too if it was like bringing Moffat back. Oh no, we can't talk about that yet. That's next episode because Moffat coming back, is that a good or bad thing? That'll be interesting to hear. Directed by Ben Chessel, produced by Chris May. As always, music by Murray Gold. Story number 306. Yeah, we get The Devil's Chord. It starts out with a 1925 on the screen, and we get a man playing the piano next to I guess, a piano student.
Yeah,
And
that's Henry. Henry.
yes, that's where it starts. Interesting kind of intro to the episode, I thought. It was like kind of, this teacher kind of talking about the devil's chord. It's like this hidden thing that you're not supposed to play. But I guess he kind of was just like, I'll just do it to kind of impress this kid or to get him re-interested because the kid seemed to be pretty bored with the piano lesson. And then he plays this forbidden chord, which is supposed to like summon the devil.
Yeah.
And so I guess he was just like, throw caution to the wind. It probably isn't going to actually summon the devil, but instead it summons some sort of god.
Yes. I mean, we find out later in the episode kind of the relation to another divine being that we've already encountered um in recent memory. But yeah, that's the boy is definitely not enjoying the piano lesson, bored out of his mind, and a well-intending teacher who was not quite on board with the church having banned this chord in music. decided to just have some fun and play it. Right. I think we've all been there in instances where it's like, okay, students or kids have lost interest, so let me do something a little bit more shocking, a little bit more intriguing. Uh I don't fault the teacher, although it seems like he might have gotten away from himself, even with some of his interactions with Maestro. How did the emergence of Maestro strike you?
I mean, it
That
kind of
first
hit,
impression.
yeah, it kind of hits you right in the face. The As soon as this, I mean, just coming crawling out of a piano, that's like horror movie kind of stuff.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it's very effective. I thought from the get-go, Maestro was an intimidating villain because
Yes. Yep.
there's this abruptness to the character, kind of right in your face, but this unhingedness where they would be like saying something and then their tone would completely change, or they would kind of like start
Yeah.
yelling for no reason but then start laughing, and it was just like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, this character is just completely unhinged but also super powerful, because it's almost like we don't even know the extent of these characters, like the toy maker, like Maestro, like these other characters that they're hinting at that are also
Right.
coming.
Yep.
We're getting into this whole new realm with Doctor Who, with these kind of more godlike characters and what they've called the Pantheon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it was a great intro. Now, do I the character itself kind of bizarre? There's that fine line, right? Like I've reviewed enough Doctor Who where you're kind of like, okay, that was too silly or that was too dumb. Talking babies, whatever, booger monsters. There's certain things where you're like, okay, they kind of crossed a line. For whatever reason, the bizarreness of this character completely worked for me. Like,
Yeah, I agree. From the emergence of the character, it's very Pennywise-esque,
mm,
right? Like it's very just you already mentioned it, abrupt. It it carries a certain gravitas, unhingedness, wild at its very core of a being, but also undaunted by anything that gets thrown at it. It's just playing. uh, Later in the episode, right, the doctor refers to the toy maker as having established the rules of play. The maestro messing with very fundamental things about life, about reality, music. Later on, they mention music of the spheres, so on and so forth, right? Like music is this fundamental thing in the universe, and the maestro can just play with it at will. It's frightening. Now, I think this is the one thing that we did communicate about the way that that shows itself throughout the episode with flying music notes, even in this beginning scene, right? Because the music teacher, the maestro kind of strokes the music teacher's ego. You're a
mhm.
genius. You have music inside of you. Let me let it out. And all of a sudden, music notes just start floating through the air, wrapping around the teacher. Scary, frightening, but also based on the nature of Maestro and how frightening it is, then you get to this very like goofy, comical, kid showy type of musical notes, right? Like it's very balanced. On the one hand, it's like, oh wow, this could be utterly disturbing, and then on the other hand, it's like, oh, it's kind of comical how this actually plays out.
And they kind of went back to it enough. We did it there later on in the episode when they're having the kind of music battle. There's just music notes kind of
Oh
going
yeah,
around, and
yep,
when they, capture Ruby at the end, being wrapped up by it, like it was used a lot.
yeah,
And personally, I thought it was silly. That was like, I agree, it kind of that went over the line a little bit. I really liked Maestro as a character. I had wished that they had toned that part of it down a little bit, where even if you wanted to have some sort of a physical element, maybe like a smoke or something that's kind of being pulled from you that's not so literal, like literal music,
yeah,
something a little bit more abstract might have gone over a little better for my personal taste. But it was something I could kind of set aside. I was like, I'm not going to get hung up on that. That is kind of dumb, but I'm not going to get hung up on it. Hopefully, they don't use it too much. They did come back to it at the very end of the episode a lot,
yeah.
but by then I was already kind of bought into the whole thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was bought in, but I've definitely, right, like you get to acceptance. First you deny, like, are they really doing this? Then you ultimately end up at accepting, and then you can move on. That's kind of where I arrived. What about Henry? right? The little boy sitting on the piano bench. Um, Somewhat
That,
of a major reveal, and then he's gone at that point.
yeah, I don't know if I'm missing something as far as like the importance of that name, other than it just being Harbinger, right?
Yeah,
Like there's not,
just the
okay.
harbinger. Yeah,
Sometimes they'll drop names. I'm like, wait, am I supposed to know? Is that a thing? Is that a person in history? I don't
yeah,
always take the time to look stuff up. So, um, it was interesting. I feel like they could have done it without that, or maybe not. Maybe you need that student there to kind of drive that part forward. But I'll be curious to find or hear or see as things kind of unfold if we see that character come back, because initially I thought, oh, okay, it was just like they were using it as a tool.
yeah,
Then you see him pop up at the end of the episode in the
yep,
like the musical number, and you're like, and he
right,
kind of peeks his head out the door, goes back in. You're like, oh, okay, Harbinger, the Harbinger is still around, even though
yeah.
even though they've kind of gotten rid of Maestro. So yeah, that was kind of, there may be more to that character than we realize.
Yeah, I'm interested just because of the teases in regards to the Pantheon and what or who could be coming next. If this is one of those characters that we'll be looking for in various episodes, and we'll be like, oh, there he is, like, oh,
Yeah.
we're seeing something's gonna be happening.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. Like he's the harbinger of things to, like, anytime you see him, that means
yeah,
another one of these gods is about to show up. Yeah,
yeah.
that would be interesting.
Any similarities to the Master with Maestro? Did it ring any tones, ring any bells when it comes to the Master?
What does maestro mean? Like from a language perspective? Uh,
Uh, that's actually a great question.
okay, I don't know.
I
Like
wasn't going there, but
I'm
that's
pretty sure,
there could be an
does it
interesting
mean
connection there.
master? No, I don't know. I should have looked that up before I asked that question. Uh, yes, I think from a some of the way that they were delivering lines, some of the
Yeah,
unhingedness definitely had some kind of reminded me of the way the Master has been played, especially in more recent versions of the Master. So yeah, it was similar, but not enough that I felt like it was like a ripoff or like, oh, this is like, obviously it's not the Master. And it's,
yeah,
so I think anytime you have a character like that, there's going to probably be some echoes of, other villains, because that is what makes a good villain. You want someone who
yeah,
has a purpose but also is a little bit crazy, that can make it for a very
yeah,
interesting villain. And that's definitely what they were going for with Maestro, although they probably way more over the top than the Master has ever been. Even as crazy as we've seen the Master, Maestro, in my opinion, just was way crazier.
yeah. Yeah, the unpredictableness, right? I think that's what makes a good some of the best Doctor Who villains is when it is someone who can match wits with the Doctor, but is very unpredictable, and you have no idea what direction they're going to go at any point in time. But that's all within the opening scene
I
of this
did like
episode.
the thing I thought was a nice touch was at the very end of kind of the introduction of Maestro before it goes to the opening credits. They look right at the camera and then play the note that basically leads to the theme
Yes,
song.
yes,
And I
yes,
thought that
yes.
was kind of a cool break the fourth wall, but also just that was very effective how they did that.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I thought the lead into the intro theme was done very well. You mentioned the breaking of the fourth wall. That is something I want to keep track of this
Hmm.
season because it seems like that fourth wall is being broken quite often, whether intentionally or they just position the camera in such a way that it feels like the fourth wall is being broken, whether it is or not. I feel like there's a scene in Boom, which we're not talking about tonight, but I feel like there's a scene where something very similar happens, but it's not necessarily directed at the audience. It's just the positioning of the camera, the eye line, everything like that, where it seems like the fourth wall just disappears. That fourth wall, I don't know if I don't know if Moffat is respecting the fourth wall when it comes to this season. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Davis is definitely going for something different,
Yeah.
and with some of these episodes being a little bit more experimental. I wouldn't say we've gotten a musical episode of Doctor Who yet, but he's definitely skirting the edges of some of this. Like there's been a musical number
Yeah.
in a bunch of the episodes, but there's almost always a kind of a reason for there to be.
Yeah.
If it's goblins singing, if it's, a kind of alternate dimension type of thing with the toy maker, you know, this episode had something at the end that felt like, okay, maybe that's just the music just came back, so now they're celebrating it. There's always some reason for there to be this music in the episodes, but at the same time, it does feel like, yeah, it's a little different than what we've seen before with Doctor Who.
Yep. 100%. Music was something that I was wondering about before the season began, and pretty much every episode has included music to some extent. It'll
Speaking
be
of
interesting to see
music,
that continue.
Ruby basically tells the doctor, "Hey, I want to go see the Beatles."
Yes.
Doctor's down for that as well. They do a little bit of their little like thing that I said annoys me with their, you know, exclamations and giddiness.
Yep.
That definitely happened a couple times in this episode. I'd say
Yep.
maybe not as bad as last episode, or maybe I'm just getting used to it. But so he's definitely down for going to see the Beatles, going back to 1963. She says something about the fashion, we have to, dress the part, which they did.
Yep.
Which brings me to this point, I guess, or this question or observation, whatever. The doctor doesn't seem to have an outfit.
Nope.
Previous doctors kind of have always had like almost like a costume,
Yep.
something that you could cosplay as if you wanted to. There was always variations. There were definitely plenty of episodes where the doctor would dress up as something else, but there was always like this base costume that the doctor would have. Pretty much every version of the doctor, at least in the modern, and I think even if you go back to classic, I'm trying to think through them in my head, they kind of all had a look.
Yep. Yep.
Capaldi and Smith, I think, had two each. Like they kind of went half through, switched their look to something else, but they all had like this distinct look. But so far, Ncuti Gatwa's doctor doesn't really have like we kind of thought when they released the initial images that some of the
Yep.
look we're like, oh, he had that. Remember, he had that like kind of orange blouse
Orange
kind of
shirt.
thing,
Yep.
yeah. And
Yeah.
he had in that look, and we're like, okay, that looks pretty cool. That's going to be his look. Well, he's every single episode now. Even this episode, he had what he initially was wearing was completely different than anything we had seen
Yeah.
before. Then he switched to his 60s clothes, which was completely different. So yeah, I think this doctor is just not going to have a kind of go-to look or outfit. I think it's just he's gonna wear something different. I mean, he's getting into that closet and he's changing
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah. You're not alone in pointing that out. There was a tweet this week that I saw on my timeline where someone's like, "Isn't it interesting that this is the costume they decided to announce when they announced the new Doctor?" And the exact costume that you mentioned with the orange shirt and like the tweed plaid jacket and plaid pants and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, we have yet to see that one show up. I think maybe it's in the episode that follows Boom. Maybe. I think I saw it in the preview. I could be wrong. It might never show up. But yeah, he's just going to the closet, pulling something new out every time. Ruby is mixing it up as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's we'll see what happens. But I think you're right. I don't think we're ever gonna have that. I mean, there's a style. There's a distinct style. There's not a distinct outfit.
Right. Yeah, maybe that's just part of this doctor's look is, he's just very fashion forward, fashion conscious, and he just likes to try out new looks and he's gonna go through the entire closet and wear, something different every day. It's another change, right? Like that
Yeah.
we've talked about the things that are changing and like the Sonic looks different now and now we have a doctor who doesn't necessarily have a specific look and these are things that we got so used to as like qualities of the doctor or certain
Yep.
looks or certain touch points that kind of made it Doctor Who. So I'm sure there's going to be some part of the fandom that's going to be like, oh, I kind of miss the fact that the Doctor had a specific outfit, or you could see a cosplayer. If you go to Comic-Con and you see someone walking down, you'd be like, oh, Doctor Who, you
Yeah.
know.
Yep.
Now, I mean, even Jodie Whittaker, like she had a very distinct, clear costume that if you saw a girl wearing that, you knew that was the Doctor. Now it's kind of like, which one do you pick if you're going to cosplay as the 15th Doctor? Because there's so many different things that he wore. I wonder if maybe they'll come back to some of these initial looks, or maybe like they will have something that's kind of more his costume. But it is a little weird that they kind of went away from that. I kind of liked the fact that the Doctor had something to identify them.
Yeah, I I think it's interesting. And I think that this is one of those things that you could change and argue that you haven't changed a foundational element of the show, right? Like RTD can play with it and no one can be like, "Oh, the essence of Doctor Who has changed." It definitely is a noticeable change, but it's just one of those things that it's hard to be like, "Oh, the costume."
What
Well,
does
then you
make
just seem
what's the formula? You know, like
right,
what are the elements, what are the ingredients that make Doctor Who Doctor Who? And I'm sure if you
right,
had that conversation, we could do a whole podcast episode where we discuss our opinions on that. And your list would be different than my list.
right. Yep,
And our
yep.
lists would be different than the listeners, and everyone would have a different opinion of like what is these ingredients, or maybe that's maybe that is the essence of Doctor Who, that there aren't ingredients. You know, like it should change. That's the whole idea of regeneration and things changing, is that you don't have specific ingredients that always make up the same thing. You want it to change. So, you know, I don't know. It's an interesting
That's
thing to think about. I kind of want to talk more about it, but we don't want to spend the whole episode talking about that. So they do go to 1963. What you would expect, right? They're going to see the Beatles, so you see, Abbey Road. Uh,
yeah. I mean, you see the zebra lines on the road. They do the fun walk across the lines on the road. Then they go to the studio. It wasn't Abbey Road yet, but they did go to the Abbey Road studio. Um, the car. They mentioned the cars. This is Earth, so Ruby's not like totally blown away by it not being Earth, but it is the 60s. So she is, hey, we're in a totally different time. Things are
she's
cool,
giddy.
and she's giddy.
Yes, she
She
likes
is
to see
excited.
she said the car, look at the cars,
Right.
this is amazing. I'm having so much fun. She wasn't even like two steps out of the TARDIS and she was already saying I'm having a great time. I mean,
Yep.
that's a positive attitude. I'll give her that. She does seem to be kind of that type of person that are like, hey, I'm up for a good time and I'm not going to be the reason why we're having a bad time.
Yep.
So, you definitely gotta appreciate that about her. They, so yeah, so are you a big Beatles fan? I don't know, like you're,
Yeah. I like the Beatles. I
okay.
really like the Beatles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Used to lay in my friend's bedroom, listening to the vinyls that he had that his dad gave him. Yeah. Enjoyed the Beatles.
Funny story, I almost named my son Jude, but ultimately decided not to because of the Beatles song. I was
Hey,
afraid that
Jude.
that would always be associated, like he would never get through life without hearing that all the time. And I was like, okay,
Yep.
I don't want to burden my child with that. So that was literally the reason I didn't choose that name, even though it was in the top three, I would say.
Flip side, I have a friend who did name his son Jude because he loves the Beatles. He
Hmm.
named his second son Desmond because he loves the Beatles.
No, not
So
because he
hey,
loves Lost.
no,
Uh,
no. I
that's a
mean,
deep
maybe
cut
I haven't.
reference for people that are very old.
That's for our rewatch podcast that we're going to be doing
Yeah, I was
in
gonna
two
say,
years.
is now if Lost is now retro, which it pretty much is, then I'm really old. So, uh,
Yeah.
if you got the Desmond reference, let us know. Also, funny story is when I was going through the top names of what to name my son, the top three options were Jude, Adam, and Quinn. And I
Yeah.
didn't pick Jude because I didn't want the Beatles association, even though I like the Beatles. Ultimately didn't pick Adam because I podcast with somebody named Adam, and I thought that would be like a little like,
It would have been weird.
yeah, it could have been weird. I'm talking about Adam, I'm talking about my son, am I talking about my co-host? You might think I named him after you, and then you get a big head about
Yep.
it. So that ultimately eliminated that name. So then we just went with the third option. So um
Nice.
that could be one of our Reels clips. So we we do
Yes.
see we do see the Beatles. They go
Yeah.
into the studio. We see the Beatles. I thought the casting was pretty good with the Beatles. Those people are all very distinct looking human
Yeah.
being. So
Yeah.
I could see it being hard to find to cast them. It probably helped that it was in a time when they kind of all had the like the floppy hair and stuff, so you can kind of
Right.
cover up some stuff.
Yep.
You don't have to make them look too much like them. But I thought the casting, especially for the two that were the focus, they definitely ignored George and Ringo, and
Yeah.
they really focused in on the two that matter, I guess, more. But yeah, I thought the casting was pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you can't complain, right? Like you don't expect to see doppelgangers on the screen when it comes to the Beatles. And honestly, I don't know if you necessarily need to. Um, the they fit the they fit the look. They had somewhat of the accents that you would expect, the caricature of the accents that you would expect them to
Mhm.
have at that point in time. When they get into the studio, you have the excitement of Ruby to cover up any possibility of you're like, that's not the Beatles. Ruby definitely convinces you it's the Beatles, and you kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, and they start singing. This is where we kind of reveal that the music has changed. Music is gone.
Yep.
Maestro has something to do with it, but they're so excited to see the Beatles. Now, of course, the Doctor and Ruby have not yet met Maestro. They don't know what's going on. So at this point, they're so confused. Like they're
Yep.
thinking they're about to see the birth of like one of the greatest albums of all time, and instead they get this almost like kids show kind of rhymey, uh,
Yep.
just really bad music, singing about
Yeah.
their dog.
Yeah. My
And
dog. I mean, Phoebe had Smelly Cat. The Beatles had my dog.
yeah,
It
there
is
you
what
go.
it is.
Yeah, so they're kind of taken aback and they're like, what's going on? So then they go to another room in the same studio where someone else is recording, which apparently is somebody I was maybe should have known who that was, but I didn't. Cilla Black.
Yeah.
So had you ever heard of her? Okay, I did
Nope,
Google her.
nope.
Apparently, she is someone who was a recording artist back in the day, and her first album was in '63. So I guess that's probably why they included her. Uh, the Doctor seemed, okay, Scylla, don't let me down. And then she does a similarly bad song about like I love you, you love me. I thought they were going to go straight into
Oh,
like the
I did
Barney
too.
lyrics
Yep, so
at
did
this
I.
point. Um, and then they're like, okay, third time's a charm. They go into like this orchestra that's playing, and then that orchestra ends up playing like Three Blind Mice,
Yep.
which was a recurring tune, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering like if that was some sort of hint at, things to come to, but who knows what they're tying together and what doesn't matter. We'll find out later.
Yep.
But I did take note of the fact that Three Blind Mice was used multiple times in this episode. So yeah, they're realizing something's not right. Something's going on with the music in the world.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at that point in time, it is just what it is, right? Like the audience has already been introduced to Maestro. Like we can take some logical leaps
Hmm.
and understand the Maestro is behind this. And it's just a matter of watching Ruby and the Doctor have these experiences, be dumbfounded, and then try to pick apart what has taken place. I do think it was really interesting at certain points of the episode how the sound carries through the episode or doesn't carry through the episode because then they go into the cafeteria, right? And they're talking to the tea lady. One thing that stuck out about me is there is no music playing in the background. Like there is no
Mm.
ambient music. There's no like undertones that you would have Murray Gold like put into the episode that carries the plot forward, stuff like that. It's just dead quiet. The fact that we know that music no longer exists in the world, and then at certain parts in the episode, music does not exist, where I think we've just become accustomed to seeing music or hearing music exist. I just found that very interesting. And maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I was not supposed to hear music there, but I was just expecting to hear it, and therefore it's gone. But they end up picking apart things with the Beatles. They take turns. Did the doctor have Paul
Yeah,
and
Doctor
he had
Doctor talked to
John?
Paul, Ruby had John. Um, they get a little like they're trying to figure like the Doctor does make a comment about how that no one's humming,
Yeah,
that
yep.
type of stuff. Like you pointed out, there's just kind of this dead silence. He does talk to George, not George. George, what am I talking about? George is in the background.
He
He's
doesn't
not
matter.
important. He's the least important Beatle. Uh, he talks to Paul, and there is something inside of Paul and John that they're
Yeah,
like kind of like something's missing, but they seem to have accepted it. He mentions like, hey, there used to be, waltzes and whatever back in the day, and it ended probably somewhere in the 20s and 30s. So the timeline matches
yep.
with what happened at the beginning of the episode. I did start to question some of the logic of it. I tried to set aside some of the logic questioning in this episode, but there were definitely times where I was like, wait, like why are they even if it's been that like we're in the 60s now, it's been 40 plus years since, music has kind of stopped. Why are they making music at all? Like,
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like
yep.
the fact that they were even in a studio recording these bad songs just didn't seem to make a ton of logical sense, but whatever, it is what it
Yeah.
is. You kind of have to just set that logic aside a little bit for the story. But yeah, he did have a moment with Paul where Paul starts to like say, oh, one note and then another, or a fourth, a fifth. Um,
A
yeah, I
minor
know.
chord, a
That was
major
another
lift.
one that I was like, intentional reference but I thought the soundtrack was really cool there, where like as he was saying the notes, like you
Uh,
heard that note kind of in the background playing. I
yep,
thought that was really cool. Like bravo to whoever came up with that idea. But I thought the soundtrack, because this is a musical episode or a lack of music episode,
yeah,
there when they did use music and how they used it was really cool.
yeah. No, agreed. 100% agreed. They did a phenomenal job with sound. Even in a later scene, which we'll get there, I found their use or their lack of use of sound just to be incredible. Very impactful in that scene. Um, at this point, as Paul is kind of building this tune in his head, did you have any expectation of what was going to take place at that point? I'll spoilers. I thought Paul was going to die. I thought they were going to kill a beetle right then and there. That the maestro was going to show up and just take Paul out.
Oh,
Like he was going to
because
start
yeah.
to sing or have music, and then maestro was going to show up. Not what happened, but that was my
No,
expectation.
no, I didn't think, and no, at no moment I thought he was in danger with that. The maestro shows up in like the reflection of the spoon
Right.
and kind of
Yep.
that stuff, and then he kind of overreacts because the doctor, it was almost like the doctor was kind of awakening him to like the
Yeah.
lack of music and like, hey, this music's inside you, like let it out. And so he starts to like sing, and then all of a sudden Maestro shows up and like kind of messes things up. Doesn't show up physically, but just kind of in these reflections, and like you hear the laughter, and
Yep.
and then Paul kind of gets mad at the doctor, like what, I forget what he says, something about an abomination or something, maybe. I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that you can tell there's like something inside of them, but they really are fighting against it. The maestro
Yeah.
has been very effective over the past 40 years in eliminating music from the world and also making people not want music to come back.
Yeah. I mean, in that instance, so I could be totally off base. The maestro doesn't show up only in reflections, but there also wasn't a piano present. The only time we ever see maestro enter reality is through a piano, and when the maestro leaves, it's through a piano. If there's no
Uh,
piano present in the room, do you have to be concerned about the maestro?
just destroy
If there's
all
no
the pianos.
instrument, that's if there's no instrument, do you have to worry? Um,
Yeah. That set aside logic, Adam. Set aside logic. No, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, I guess if that's the only way, or maybe that's just the chosen way that,
the chosen way.
like that they like to enter the world. It does seem interesting when you try to think about these characters that are godlike,
Yeah,
right? It does feel like the doctor's outmatched and they could do whatever they want. Like, why would they even toy with him? And it was
right.
funny because my son doesn't really watch Doctor Who with me. But he was asking me about it because he kind of saw me watching that episode. And he was even kind of questioning that. Like, well, why do like the toy maker, he asked me about the toy maker. He said, why wouldn't the toy maker just make the doctor turn into like shredded paper and be done with him? Like, what's the like why even fight the
Yeah,
doctor if you or can overpower him so easily? And I was like, it is an interesting question because once we're going into this realm of the doctor now facing these more powerful creatures or whatever they are, entities, how can you tell a compelling story without you starting to think, I feel like the doctor should just get beat here. Like this is too easy, or he shouldn't, if he's having a music off with the god of music,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah,
be a fair
yeah.
fight, right? But he
Yeah.
somehow did defeat the god of music. So there's always some sort of technicality. He even mentions it himself, like there's a trick. You only get the one, does
Yeah.
he call it a
Right.
trick? Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
you only get the one thing that, maybe lets you defeat them, but that's not going to always happen. So I wonder how, as they continue to bring in these kind of more godlike characters, is how do you continue to tell a compelling story without it starting to feel like, wait, is the doctor just a god because he can defeat all the gods? So,
I mean, timeless child. Like, does the timeless child come into
ooh,
play here? He's not a Time Lord.
maybe
He is
he's
where
a
all the Time Lords
fallen
came
god.
from.
He's like
He
a
was
fallen god.
abandoned somewhere.
Hmm.
He, I don't know. Like maybe
Is there
RTD said
internet
he wasn't gonna.
speculation? Like
I have no
like
idea.
because I haven't been hitting the forums. You know me, I
No,
tend to not. But now that you're saying this, I'm kind of like, oh, this sounds like
I've
the type of stuff that you'd be seeing in the message boards.
I've seen it. Honestly, I've seen a couple things that are like, oh, this could be majorly spoilery if you dove into it. A couple theories floating around out there. I haven't touched any of them, so I don't know if this is what people are already talking about.
Hmm.
But RTD mentioned like he's not going to do away with Timeless Child. But what if he's just spending this entire season again, to your point, changing fundamental aspects of Doctor Who? What if he's spending this entire season building up to the fact that the Doctor, as the Timeless Child, is actually one of these Maestro, toy maker, the trickster people are mentioning? I don't know if that's
Hmm.
a thing, but um, yeah, what if?
That is interesting to think about because it does seem to fit. And
Right.
if RTD, as you call him, is
I
uh
just can't say his
just
name.
just kind of reinforcing, not only is he not going against the timeless child, but he's like reinforcing it even more, where he's
Yeah.
like, hey, this is a storyline that was handed to me, but now I'm gonna really like lean into it and say, okay, yeah, the Doctor's not Time Lord, which being a Time Lord alone gives you a lot of cool power. But like, no, we're going to take it to the next level. He's actually, part of this pantheon or part of these gods, and he's maybe punished and was turned into a child, and
Yeah.
cast off as like a castaway or something instead of, maybe he disagreed with what they were doing and maybe lost all his memory. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you could go about
Yep.
what this character is. So, you got me thinking
It,
now.
it,
And they do like they drop some other turn things on us later in the episode, as far as two more characters, right? That
yeah.
we don't know. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I do like this idea of this pantheon and kind of tying this all together. I think could mean for some pretty cool future villains or
Yeah.
bigger things that the Doctor has to compete against.
I mean, he didn't lose his memory. His memory is just sitting in the core of the TARDIS, right? That's Whitaker's
Yeah,
fob
the
watch
reveal.
is in the
That'll be the
TARDIS
big
somewhere.
reveal. Do we get that now, or do we get that 3 seasons from now when
Three seasons
Moffat
from
is
now,
the
right?
showrunner again?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyways,
We have a scene where the Doctor's having these people like move a piano to the rooftop.
yep,
This kind of leads to some cool conversations and kind of kicks things off with the maestro as well. But because they're on the rooftop, they're talking about, they're looking out over London,
yeah,
and then it's kind of like, oh, 1963. If you're a fan of Doctor Who and you know the history of Doctor Who, you know that that's an important year. And that's when the first Doctor, that's the beginning
yep,
of the story, right? So the first Doctor and Susan, his granddaughter, are there, right? Like
yeah,
they're
yep.
sharing the space now with the 15th Doctor, and he mentions it. He brings it up. Hey, I'm actually I live over there. That I'm there now, and with my granddaughter. And then this is all news to Ruby. Kind of like, wait, what? You have a granddaughter, and that means you had kids at some point, which I feel like has always been speculated. Like, was Susan actually his granddaughter, or was Susan just somebody he called granddaughter? Well, it seems like now this is kind of confirming,
Yeah,
no, actually, it is his granddaughter. He actually has children or had children at some point because he just
yeah.
confirmed that. So there's a whole nother, thing, where we're like, okay, there's these characters that we don't even know
Yeah,
yet that
yeah,
exist or that have existed in his past that he had a child who also had a child, which is why he has a granddaughter.
yeah, yep. He's a dad. Dad to dad. We touch on that and boom. Again, I'm getting ahead of ourselves. But yeah, it does seem like some of these things that we've just kind of um guessed at. That's
Speculated.
assumed, speculated. Thank you.
uh
It does seem like they've just kind of taken that one and been like, "Yep, that's there. Put that on the shelf. You now know, hey, granddaughter, dad, all this other stuff. Okay, now we can move on."
and Susan's a
Um,
Time Lord.
and
uh
Susan's a Time Lord.
yeah, which I mean maybe this stuff has been already revealed and I just don't remember, but yeah, now we know like he thinks that Susan could even just be dead because that was the other thing, I guess. Once again, I need to rewatch what happened with the Master and how he eliminated the Time Lords again. It seems like the Time Lords have been wiped out in so many ways, and then it's like, oh wait,
Yeah,
actually no, like we saved them or we put them in a cup of
cup of
soup,
soup.
pocket universe, whatever you want to call it. So it feels like there's a lot of rehashing the same thing.
Yeah,
But I guess with the Master, with the last time was kind of more definitive. Okay, now this time for real, they've all been wiped out, and he really is the last of the Time Lords. And so his assumption is that Susan, although she did exist in 1963, is probably no longer around because she was wiped out by I forget what he called it, some kind of wave.
genocide.
Yeah,
Genocide rolled across time and space.
yeah.
The
So
great big cellular explosion.
there you go, cellular explosion. So I didn't remember that or them talking about that when the Time Lords were wiped out last time by the Master, that he mentioned that, oh yeah, by the way, if any other Time Lords were out there, it got them too. Like,
Right.
I just assumed that some of them could have survived if they weren't around there, but maybe not. And this is also the Doctor speculating. He doesn't know if she's dead or not,
Yeah.
but he's just saying she might be.
Right. This is also the scene where, for like the second episode in a row, the Doctor specifically calls out timelines. Like, you can't cross paths with yourself. Um,
Mm.
I don't know. It's a small thing, but it is one of those instances where it's like, again, I feel like for new fans of the show, just trying to reiterate the fact that there are some rules. Like, you cannot cross timelines, bad things happen. Ruby, you can't cross your own timeline as the Doctor. I can't go check on myself in 1963 Shoreditch to see my granddaughter, see myself, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Timelines. Although we break that
Yeah,
rule
I was gonna say
occasionally.
there are rules that can be broken if we need to, but yes,
Right.
there are some rules that they try to abide by. And yeah, it makes sense that he's not going to go over there and find, hey, look at, I'm your
Cardinal.
yeah, I'm a future version of you. He's not gonna they're not gonna do that if they can avoid it. But
Right.
the next time they do need to team up with a doctor, then suddenly that rule is broken.
Yep.
What were we talking about? Oh yeah.
Ruby's on the rooftop. Doctor has a piano installed. He, instead of him playing, he has Ruby sit down, play a song. She plays a song she wrote for her friend who got her heart broken, starts singing. Oh, and this is also where the Doctor reveals that he was being somewhat creepy and following her around that Christmas night or multiple Christmas nights and watching her perform her concert. Which Ruby takes that like all in stride and doesn't dig into it all that much. But Ruby starts playing, and lo and behold, Maestro shows up.
So do you think that because that is kind of interesting if you kind of go back to the Church on Ruby Road, that episode, and they do kind of reveal that he's kind of watching her,
Yeah,
and then he shows up, to catch the drink or whatever. Maybe that's because I guess the explanation in the moment was like the goblins, he was more kind of paying attention to what they were doing and not necessarily Ruby. But now that it's been revealed that Ruby is a little bit of a anomaly and that he
yeah,
doesn't fully understand her, that maybe that intentionally he has been kind of like, hey, there's this something that doesn't make a lot of sense. I need to keep my eye on it. And it wasn't necessarily just about the goblins, but also about her.
yeah. I also, those scenes from the church on Ruby Road are really timey-wimey. For some reason, like, no matter how many times I watched that episode, which I did watch that episode more than once, it always felt like those scenes were like out of order or out of sequence. They just seemed like they didn't necessarily flow one to the next. And so maybe there is some timey-wiminess to it. Maybe he did jump back and forth. Maybe he was keeping an eye on her, but it's a future iteration, or a more future past iteration. But yeah, it's just interesting. She takes it in stride. She goes on, plays, and out from the piano crawls the maestro, and the doctor immediately flees. He's out of there.
This doctor runs.
This doctor runs. I also loved the fact that he calls out that was the giggle. Like he immediately recognizes what he's dealing with because the giggle matched the toy maker from the special. Um,
So was it the sound that Maestro made was the same as that, like, like
yeah.
whatever, like, okay, I can't,
Yes. Yep.
I know I didn't nail it, but that, okay, I did not pick up on that because when he said that was the
Yeah.
giggle, I was like, what do you mean that was the giggle? I didn't realize. Now that you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, of course, it was the sound that
Yeah.
Maestro made. Okay.
Yep.
Um, yeah, the doctor just runs and hides.
Yep.
I don't know that I love that about this doctor yet. It does seem like it's kind of a trait that this doctor may have, maybe just a little bit more self-aware of like, hey, maybe he's more fragile. He does say that he's been torn in half. His soul was torn in half with what
Yeah.
happened with the toy maker. And so maybe that's something that he's a little bit more careful now. Like, hey, I can't just go run headlong into these type of battles. I need to be a little bit more, I need to survive these battles.
Yeah.
And so let me go hide, regroup, figure out a strategy as opposed to just standing up to. Now, we are used to doctors tending to be
Yeah.
fearless and standing up. Not that they don't ever run, but it does seem like this doctor, that's his first instinct. As soon
Yeah.
as he's faced with something, he does run.
Yeah. I agree. It caught me off guard. And it was slightly concerning. That said, this is probably one of my favorite scenes from the entire episode because of, I mean, after the doctor hides, they're down in the cellar, Maestro is descending, very ominous, right? Like, dang, they are going to find Ruby and the doctor. And then who knows what happens at that point? Like, not that it would be the end, but it definitely felt like there was stakes. That it was on the line at that
Yeah.
point. And then the doctor just kills all noise. And there was something that there's a scene from Attack of the Clones, right, where they're flying through the asteroid belt, and Django drops the sonic mine, and it goes off, and it has that like no sound to all of a sudden like the rippling sound through the asteroid field, and it breaks everything up. The any time that a show can just like kill all sound
Mhm.
and just go dead quiet, that's like some of my favorite stuff ever. I just think that's so impactful. And the fact that we had, I don't know, 2 3 minutes of this episode just going dead quiet, and you see the maestro trying to figure it out, trying to figure out like, can I sing, can I do this, can I do this, and then the whole tuning fork in the puddle, and it just like shatters the sonic. The best scene out of this entire episode, hands down, in my opinion.
Yeah. It was effective. It was eye-catching. Kind of like, oh wow. I mean, it makes sense. A Sonic,
Yeah.
that maybe one of the things that makes the most sense and how he uses the Sonic, because a lot of other ways
Right.
he uses
Yeah.
it maybe don't make as much sense. But it's like, oh yeah, if it's a Sonic, it should be have some sort of power connected to sound, and he was able to eliminate sound. Now, why there was a bright light associated to him
Yeah.
eliminating sound, not sure. I guess just for the aesthetics, they thought it looked cool. But I was kind of
Yeah.
thinking, man, be careful. Make sure that those wood slats that are holding, don't have any gaps in them because you're going to be shining right through there, and
Right. Right.
Maestro is going to catch you. But there was definitely a feeling of peril. I thought I really liked how you know, as much as I didn't necessarily like the fact that Doctor wasn't willing to stand up to Maestro, it also did add like, man, if the Doctor's afraid of this thing,
Yeah.
then it's legit. And I think that kind of added to the suspense. And even Ruby was kind of like, why are you so afraid? Like Ruby was kind of confused and,
Yeah.
you know, almost, I wouldn't say she was disappointed in him, but he definitely had much more of a defeatist
Yeah.
attitude about what was going on than she did. He kept
Right.
saying, I can't beat this thing. You know, I can't survive. My soul's been torn in half, so I wouldn't be able to survive, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of like she's like, but, like I'm
Beyonce,
evidence that
Sam
music's not
Fender.
gone, or like, like
Yeah.
she starts naming different songs and her blah, blah, blah. So then he's like, almost like he has to prove her wrong in her positivity. She's trying to be positive. He's being super negative, and then he's like, well, you should be negative with me. I'm gonna fly back to your
Right.
time and show you. And sure
Yeah.
enough, he takes the TARDIS back to 2024, and the entire world has been like decimated, or at least London has. I'm assuming that that spreads further than just what we saw in London.
Yeah. And this is where like yeah, devastation is there, music is gone. Without music, people don't know how to deal with a broken heart. Instead, they just go to war. Like the doctor gives all these reasons for why music is essential. With that said, I got a little distracted by the fact that the doctor's like, what time was it for you back home? And Ruby's like, June or July. So we have like a 6 month gap between Space Babies, which the doctor returns her on Christmas again, right? And this episode where it's now June or July back in Ruby's present time. 6 months. Like, who knows what's happened between those 2 points in times, like what adventures Ruby and the Doctor have been on. But for me, it's like, okay, so that explains why Ruby is like, wait a second, I know who you are. Why are you afraid of this? Like, you are the Doctor. You should not be afraid of this. What other victories has she already seen the Doctor have? What other amazing things have they already experienced together?
Hmm.
But the fact that there's like 6 months, that's just like that's fascinating to me because the way that the episode starts, right? Like she starts it by saying, "You asked me where in time and space I want to go. I want to see the Beatles." 6 months have already passed. Like
Hmm.
you haven't done what you wanted to do yet. It took you 6 months to figure out what you want to do. Um, anyways, that stuck out to me. I got a little distracted by that June July date that she throws out there.
Yeah, I didn't honestly, once again, didn't even think about that. Like now that you're saying, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. There would have been some time gap there, but when they went
A
back and
huge time gap.
yeah, I wasn't even thinking about it. I did think I did find this interesting, probably not even worth bringing up, but when Ruby sees that the entire world has been decimated based on what happened with the Maestro going back. I guess the Maestro is kind of a time traveler too, or can be in all places at all time, maybe omnipresent, I don't know,
Yeah.
but decided to kill time in the 20s. And then now that has reverberated forward. So even though she was coming from a time that did have music, it does get a little timey-wimey
Oh yeah.
because
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not gonna go down that
I
road,
mean,
but you know what I mean.
this is not Back to the Future, right? Where it's like he slowly starts to disappear because his past has been messed up.
Right.
This is
And
Doctor Who, where Ruby's
exactly.
like, "Why am I not disappearing?" And the
Why
Doctor's
am
like, "Because you're with me."
right. Which made me think back on the butterfly scene where if that's the case, if
Right.
traveling with the doctor prevents you from being affected by things that are being changed in the time stream, then stepping on a butterfly should not instantly turn you into an alien.
He hadn't
So,
configured the TARDIS yet. The butterfly effect modulation or whatever wasn't configured. It's good now.
like I said, I shouldn't even bring it up, but that did stand out to me when she said that. Like, why am I still alive? Oh, because you're with me. I'm like, well, what happened with the butterfly? Um, so yeah, he was still modulating. So this is the point where they're in that time and they're looking at all this
Yeah.
rubble, and then all of a sudden, snap! Like
Yep.
we get a toy maker kind of moment here where they're like almost in this different dimension, where everything goes blank. Maestro's there with a piano, right?
Yep. With the piano.
Um, and then this is the point where the Doctor and Maestro, surprisingly, up to this point, have not actually met yet,
Yeah.
because of the, we saw a lot happening before this and the Doctor running. This is the first time they actually get to talk. The
Yeah.
Doctor does have a little bit of bravado, I think, here because now it's almost like, well, I can't go anywhere, so I might as
Right.
well face this thing. And this
Yeah.
is where, you start to hear what is the end game, I guess, for this? Like, because even Ruby's kind of like, what's the point? Like, okay, you destroyed all music. Like if you're the god of music, why would you want to destroy
Yeah.
it, you know? And then it was kind of like, oh no, I don't necessarily want to destroy music. I just want to destroy all human music, but I
I
want it to
just
be
want it for
more.
myself.
Yeah, like, but it's like I forget the term that they use for when the wind blows through the trees. And
Yeah.
so kind of the idea of, if you eliminate humans, then it's more of a natural music.
Yeah.
And then but on a larger scale, not wind blowing through the trees, the wind, going through the universe and like these dead planets essentially. And that's the ultimate goal is that all of humanity and all of life, I guess, in the universe is just completely wiped out. And it's just this like now more of a natural state of music that is all for Maestro and not for anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Um,
Which like sounds like
yeah.
something a god would, right? Like that's the motivation only a god would have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I
That's
I bought it. I was like, okay, yeah, that's motivation to kill everybody.
yeah. I mean, I can't argue with it, right? And this is one of those things that it's like, okay, um, do you remember when Matt Smith like drops that weird word for Panticore, the smell of concrete after the rain? Um, it's just one of like they're throwing out Aeolian tones, and it's like okay, this is like a legitimate thing. The maestro is mentioning like the music of the spheres, which is a legitimate thing. That's everything in theory. Everything is comprised or vibrates right at a certain
Mhm.
rate. Everything has sound involved in it, and the fact that Doctor Who is like keying off of this evil being that just wants to get back to the purest form of sound and music. It's actually very compelling. Like it's a very very creative villain for Doctor Who to pull out, especially when you are right on the heels of Toymaker, right? The fundamental laws of play, um, these foundational elements of reality. Um, it's
They,
compelling. It's fun.
they were hinting at this, they were laying the seeds for this all the way back with the Doctor and River. Remember when they went to that
Yeah.
place
Oh
and they
yeah.
wanted
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
hear
Yeah. The singing. Yes.
the singing hills, or I forget what it was, but it
Yeah.
was some kind of the wind blowing through the way it did, and
Yeah.
they made the sound. You could only hear it at this time. And now, I mean, obviously, that was not the reason they had that in that episode, but it does call
That's
back to that in a way.
yeah. And I mean, those are those things that I think really does make Doctor Who great. Like it compelling, enjoyable, entertaining, engaging when they get creative like this. When there are things that you can see tie back to the 50 years of Doctor Who that exists. 60 years of Doctor Who that exists. Dang, we've been doing this for a long time. Um, that's what makes this compelling is because they can tie things together when they are cognizant of it so stinking well. But yeah, the maestro is just playing with them right now.
Yeah,
The maestro sings a song about the toy maker, their dad, and how
and
much
how
they hated
bad.
their dad.
Yeah,
That's it's it's wild. It's a wild scene because you honestly feel similar to the toy maker that maestro is in control. Like the doctor has no and maestro plays by a different set of rules than the toy maker does. The doctor tries to call maestro out on like fair competition, a fair game, let's play a game. That's not how the maestro rolls.
kind of though, because when he said, you have to play by the rules, and he brought up the toy maker, the maestro did give up some information, almost like,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, you're right, I do have to give you some information. So how do you how do you send them back, send
a
them back to
secret
hell
chord.
essentially,
Yeah,
is it's this chord. You have to, like, you had the one that summoned, now you have the one that kind of gets rid of them. And so if the doctor didn't have that information, he wouldn't be able to defeat them. And so I think that there is some of this kind of idea that gods, even though they do have all this power, do still have to play by some rules. Who knows why? Because if you're gods, why do you have to play by any
right.
rules? But it's like, it's
Yep.
almost like in their like kind of moral code is that they do have some rules they have to play by. And then this is the one little trick, I guess, maybe that got the doctor the information that he needed so he could use that later to ultimately send them back.
Yeah. How do you feel about? a being like the maestro, I keep on saying the maestro, like there's a definite article. How
Just
do you feel
Maestro.
about how do you feel about Maestro being able to control the TARDIS?
I mean, like everything resonates, everything, whatever. So they can pretty much control anything, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah,
Fine. That's not the weird. That's not the weirdest explanation I've had to live with in Doctor Who. It kind of made sense. It was nice to. It was like, okay, now the Doctor's like panicking because
yeah,
it's one thing to not be able to face Maestro, but then now the Maestro could destroy your only means of escape
yeah,
and also something you love. We know how much he loves the TARDIS. And so he's quick to be like, "Oh, you're hurting my baby. I got to get back and get out of here." So he runs over, takes the TARDIS. The only place apparently because of the damage that's being caused, the only place they can go is back to where they came from, which is 1963. And with this new information on the core, Maestro says you have to be a genius to defeat me, and you're not
yeah.
that.
Right,
I thought that was interesting because I've kind of always thought of the Doctor as a genius. But from the maestro's perspective, it's not, if you're not a musical genius, like you have to be a
right.
musical genius to be able to come up with that chord. And so the doctor's like, all right, he has enough confidence in himself that if I go back to 1963, they go to the studio, he gets John Lennon's guitar, like maybe we can trust to be some kind of inspiration,
Yep,
and says, hey, I have thousands of years of experience. I can figure this out, is kind of
right.
his attitude. Um, so yeah, he quickly realizes that that wasn't enough. Just trying to come up with the chord on the guitar. Literally, like as soon as he tries to start doing it, Maestro's already there. Maestro's
Yep.
already capturing Ruby. And so it was a very short-lived attempt, at least initially.
Yeah, I mean they it definitely didn't seem like they rushed once they got into the studio. Like I don't know. And why did you have to be in the studio in the first place? Like, why couldn't you have just started strumming on that guitar wherever you picked it up? But he had Ruby at the soundboard. He was like, they were getting ready
Well, he
for a
did
full
the
recording
well,
session.
I think he said
He
he put the
plugged in the
Sonic
Sonic to the
because he was
soundboard.
saying if
Yeah,
we can record this, if they can figure out what the chord is and record it with the Sonic, then they could use that. I don't think he was expecting that Maestro was going to catch up with them so fast.
yeah.
I think he
Okay.
thought they had more time to work with based on the way he was going about things. Second episode in a row, we've had the Sonic just plugged into
Right.
a board. That's
I mean, not even a slot. It's just like
who
shoved
knows.
into any
Yeah,
space on that board
yeah, I'm
because there
pretty
were no
sure.
USB ports on that board.
I think they had those big like headphone jack. Remember those giant
Yeah,
headphone jack
yeah,
ports? That's what I'm imagining. Maybe the Sonic has an adapter for
yeah.
that. But yeah, he just shoved it right into the board. So I think this Sonic is pretty compatible with any technology,
That's, yeah, I would say so.
as the Sonic
Uh,
should be.
as the Sonic should be. He chases after Ruby, right? Because she gets snagged by the CGI music notes,
Yes,
pulled through the halls,
they're back.
maybe even leaving nail marks in the floor as she's getting pulled.
I've always
Um,
like let me just say because that's like a thing, right? In movies, you get
yeah.
pulled across the floor and you're like scratch. For one thing, that doesn't actually happen. Like if you pulled me across a wood floor right now, I'm not going to be digging my nails so deep into it that it's going to leave furrows. But also just the idea of that, like
Yeah,
in like
no.
the idea of it, like
Mm,
kind of basically ripping your fingernails off is what would probably
yeah.
happen. And I was watching that, I'm like, oh, not that. Like do away with that effect. It'd be
Splinters.
fine if she was kind of just putting her hands trying to
Yeah.
grab it, but the whole scratching the floor is just like, oh yeah, it's such an effective cringe moment
Yeah.
that I didn't like. I didn't like that they used that in this context.
Yeah. She gets hoisted up though by those music notes floating in the music room. The doctor comes in. And again, like in my opinion, despite the CGI music notes, a solid scene, right? Because the doctor's like, please don't do this, please don't do this. Meister's like, no, she has a song inside of her.
Doctor
And
yells like angrily again. So
yeah,
another episode where we get angry yelling doctor.
yeah.
Another trait that seems like this doctor has.
But I mean, and Maestro at this point looks totally unhinged, right? Like any makeup they had at this point is not in the best state. And I don't know why, because
Also
it's not like
changes.
they're losing. They're
Yeah,
doing pretty well at this point, but they look even more manic than what they have the entire episode.
I think they're starting to realize that there there could be, I think there was some overconfidence all
Yeah,
throughout, but I think they're getting to the point now they're like, oh, maybe I've revealed too much. All it takes is them to get lucky and hit the right chord and I'm gone.
yeah,
And they know that the doctor's kind of working on it. They also, I think, have a bit of respect for the doctor's power. They made a comment when they were in that little kind of in between realm,
yep.
called him the temporal
Lord
Lord
Temporal.
Temporal, and kind of like, oh, you could just go anywhere, and pop up anywhere in time, and you could tell there was a little bit of respect there. Timey-wimey, the mention of
Yeah,
timey-wimey was kind of nice. So I do think that maybe you are starting to see a little of like, oh crap, maybe I can be defeated by this guy, and I don't like it.
yeah, yeah. Oh, cool. I'll take it. Um, this scene though, because Ruby is forced to sing, and the song that comes out is another callback to the church on Ruby Road. Um,
Yeah,
these are
Christmas.
great moments. These are great
No,
moments.
I love this part because I thought, Ruby gets pulled up and they want, so basically Maestro's like, I want the music inside her because she's the only human left with music in her heart.
Yeah,
And that's basically what Maestro needs to eliminate and also feed off of. But once, like you said, once Ruby starts singing, it's like there's this other thing. What did she say? There's a hidden song deep within her soul,
yeah,
and it's the Christmas music. And then the doctor starts to kind of perk up a little bit, like, oh, wait, like this was unexpected. This wasn't part of the doctor's plan,
yeah,
to defeat Maestro. This was kind of surprise to him too, that, oh, wait, like she can't even be hurt by Maestro because of the power that's inside of her and the song that's inside of her. It was a nice moment, I thought. Kind of cheesy, but still I liked it. Like the snow starts
yeah.
falling again, which we've already seen that happen now multiple times. So it's kind of like, okay, what's going on with that? So obviously there's some explanation coming. But yeah, I thought it was kind of a cool moment to see Maestro almost like, I don't even know how to deal with this right now.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And I mean to the point, and this is a little bit later on where they basically just give up and they're like, there's something wrong with her. Like she's not right. She's not normal. But in between that, there's there's the phrases that the maestro says, like, how can a song have so much power and power like him? And
Hmm.
then the doctor, like, who? And maestro says, the oldest one on the night of her birth. He can't have been there. What for? What for? What for? Like, who is the oldest one? Who is the one that has the power? Father Christmas? Like where what are we at? What are we talking about here? The mystery deepens.
Yeah, that was such a crazy line drop. The oldest one, like cool
Yeah.
name.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know, right?
when you're talking about gods, you're talking about pantheons. The oldest one almost implies the original God, right?
Kronos. Yeah.
Like the original, what most cultures would refer to as God. If you have a belief that there is only one God, that would be the oldest one, right?
Yeah.
There's probably some kind of, obviously lots of different religions have lots of different beliefs about, but if you're trying to pull in things, Christmas is associated to Christianity, which is associated to Jesus Christ, which is associated to the one God, but is also a
Right.
Trinity. So there's so many things they could be pulling from here that they could be, playing off of. And when I heard that term, the oldest one, I'm like, ooh, that's not the big bad though.
Right. No,
Like to
no.
me, that's
Th-
almost like something that if Maestro is afraid of, this may be the powerful, original, powerful God being that all these little lesser gods have like rebelled against or something, and now they're
yeah.
gonna come, now,
Well,
uh-oh, he's back, or something. I don't know. There's so many cool ways it could go with this, and I just love that the oldest one term just like really sold it
yeah.
for me.
So like putting a pin in that, right? Because you have like the oldest one on this side that all like the villains are fleeing from or will flee from. On the other side, you have Meep the Beep the Meep,
I forgot.
who
No, we don't talk about.
I okay, but back in that episode, it was like the boss is coming. Was the
Yeah.
toy maker the boss? I don't think
Mm-mm.
that was ever like established that the toy maker was the boss. Was it?
No,
I'm just
that
wondering,
was
like,
implied, right?
do we then have like these two diametrically opposed light and dark? Maestro's scared to death of the oldest one, and Beep the Meep is like, "Hey, watch out for the boss that's coming." Like, are they on this collision course at some point within the next two seasons? These, I mean,
But
characters are just throwing out these random sentences that we have no idea what they mean
yeah,
at this point.
it's like the writers know this and they know that we're gonna all be speculating. You
Right.
know, they drop the term like this and it's like, oh man, that can mean so much. They also, skipping past like the music battle and how it all it goes down. Not that we will talk about it, but the when Maestro is ultimately banished, they also say another thing, which was the one who waits is almost here.
Yeah.
So now we have another introduction of somebody. So we have the oldest one and we have the one who waits. So is that kind of like God, the oldest one is the God and the one who waits is the devil, like the most
Yeah.
powerful beings on either side of light and dark. Like, it's kind of a cool I like that they're continuing to drop these things. I didn't think I was gonna like them going into this whole like God realm and like, bringing that
That's
in. It
right.
was it was the downfall of the TV show Supernatural too. But once you kind of get to these levels, it's like, almost like, okay, where do you go from there? But I kind of like how they're handling it. It's very mysterious. Now, once it's all said and done, will it have a satisfying
Right.
ending, or will it kind of feel like, oh, we go back to the Daleks? Now it's going to feel really lame, because he just fought God, So we'll see, how the long term of it is. But right now, at least, I'm kind of into the mystery of it all.
Yeah, it's we are two episodes in, right? And they are just sowing so many seeds for what could come moving forward. I don't feel like we've had this rich of mysteries in Doctor Who in a long time. I don't know if we've ever had like this much stuff front loaded ever. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like some of the other mysteries that we've had put before us, and I don't know of this much that has been just laid out of what potentially could come. But I mean, to your point, it might be too big. Like, are they going too big too early? What's the payoff going to be? And then where do you go from there? But
And do they tie it back in? I mean, there is definitely some threads with Jodie Whittaker, um, with her doctor, because she basically faced off the embodiment of time,
yeah, yeah,
which
yep,
in and of itself is almost like a god. And
right.
so do you tie it back into that? Is time part of the pantheon? Is, like there's definitely things that they were doing with the timeless child and with the everything that she was facing that could tie into some of this stuff as well if they want to. How much do they want to weave it all together? Yet to be
I
seen.
I I don't know. It seems like
But
they're not afraid of anything at this point.
But then we have the mystery of Ruby. Maestro said called her creature. Like
Yeah,
this creature is very wrong.
yep.
There's obviously a huge mystery there. She has some sort of internal power as well. So it's almost like, is she part of it too? Like, is she a god, or does she have some connection to gods, or is she a fallen god? It will be very interesting to see. There's so many ways they could go with it.
Yeah, yeah, it's gonna be interesting. At this point, though, once the Maestro pretty much wraps things up and is like, "This creature is very wrong," I thought it was over. I didn't
Should have
know.
been
I
over.
I kind of like
That
expected.
should it should have
I
ended there.
Yeah, I kind of expected Maestro to just be like, "Okay, peace. I'm done. Like, I can't do this. I'm not gonna win. I might as well just leave." Uh, but then they have a big battle, big music battle.
This is where the episode definitely started to go downhill for me. The music battle was completely unnecessary. I don't understand if it was a time filler or if they just, because it doesn't make sense that the doctor would be able to go toe to toe with Maestro
No.
in this sense. Then they got kind of silly with it all, the piano playing, and then they're like, Ruby jumps in and they're playing the piano behind their back at one point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I'm like, dude, if you're fighting for the whole of humanity, maybe don't show off. Maybe just defeat. I don't need to do the back behind the back piano play. But
Yeah.
yeah, that whole thing, and then Maestro gets kind of upset. Oh yeah, so the doctor uses the piano, starts to play the notes of the chord, gets to the final note, doesn't hit it. Then that gives Maestro another chance, I guess, to escape and kind of kicks the piano out into the hallway and traps the doctor in a drum, traps Ruby in a cello, bass, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that was all kind of silly to me. Like that whole sequence, I wish it had gone straight from Ruby kind of internally defeating Maestro to them trying to attempt to play the chord, to John and Paul.
Yeah.
That would have been a better
Yeah.
sequence. The whole everything in between and them getting trapped in the instruments, it starts to go a little off, off kilter for me.
I can't argue with that. I agree. It kind of felt not out of place, right? Like you kind of expected something like this to
It was
happen.
just
You
too
kind of
much.
expected, right? I think it would have all been redeemed if someone would have started playing Devil Went Down to Georgia. Like
I
if
thought that's what was going to happen
as
because that's pretty much what was going on there. And
soon as Maestro pulled out the violin, I thought, oh, here we go.
it was clearly a call to that, right? Like that wasn't unintentional. I think that was, anytime you have a musical, if you're going to be going against the devil, essentially musically, he's got a fiddle.
Right.
Like that's just
Yeah.
that's part of uh the rules. That's a
Right.
rule.
It's there was much of that that could have been cut. I agree. Like just removing it entirely. I have like this callback to Doctor Strange, right? Like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, they fight with music notes. And I people at that point in time flipped out because they're like, oh, they're just copying an anime. Like I have any battle of music now is just like this reference to this huge pop culture battle about who did it first and all this other stuff. So to
Uh,
watch it show up in Doctor Who, a battle with music notes, I was like, okay, are we really here? Um, I I agree with you. It would have been great if after Ruby screwed everything up by just being a wrong creature, if they would have somehow found a way to play the chords, screw up, let John and Ringo, John and Paul
Now we've gotten a
fix
Jordy and
things.
Ringo reference.
George, they got to be involved at some point, right?
They
They
were
have to
not.
be
They didn't
there.
matter.
No, at all. But the hanging, okay, so this is the one point where it's like the hanging music notes. Paul and John can see these music notes hanging over the piano as it gets pushed out into the hall. They come together. That's an unintentional reference. They
Nice.
come together and they have that like exchange in the hallway, look at each other, play those notes, the third, fourth, and fifth, and then
Did you
boom,
like
it
it?
happens.
Did you like that part, or was it too cheesy?
No, I mean it wasn't too cheesy. It wasn't too cheesy. Um, I don't know if I necessarily liked it. I think it was a fitting end, right? Like you had to bring the Beatles back at some point. You couldn't let the Beatles be the ones that were like, "You're disgusting. Music is disgusting," and then
Mhm.
not bring them back in to do something good. I don't know though if I was like,
I think they set the groundwork for them because it was kind of like the doctor was confident that it was almost like a challenge for the doctor when Maestro is like, "You're not a genius. Like, I can defeat you. You're not a problem." The doctor's like, "No, I can. I've lived for thousands of years. I can figure this out. I can be just as good as any musician." And then he fails.
yeah,
And then the only people that could actually banish Maestro were musical geniuses. Like that's what it was. Like that's why
yeah.
they had said that's how I read it. Like I didn't see it as like,
Oh, I
oh,
don't think you're wrong. Yeah.
okay, yeah, like I was just kind of like, okay, that and I wasn't even expecting to see them again. I thought, okay, Doctor's gonna figure out this thing and banish and game over. The fact that, you see John walking down the hall, he finds the piano. Oh, that's curious. What are these notes hanging in the air? The fact that they even used physical notes hanging in there in this point didn't bother me. I wish that was the only time they did it.
Uh,
Um, and he's kind of, and then and then you hear the voiceover of things he had said earlier in the episode, and his purpose, and all that stuff. And I'm
Yeah,
like, as someone, I would never say I'm a big, huge Beatles, diehard Beatles fan, but I appreciate the Beatles. I like
yeah,
their music. Hopefully, most people do. So there was a moment of like I don't know what you would call it because it's not really nostalgia. I mean, I'm not, like that's before my time, the Beatles,
yeah,
but there was definitely a moment of appreciation of like, okay, yeah, we're recognizing the genius of these people. I had just seen a movie about the Beatles not that long ago, that called Yesterday, where
yes,
like the
yep,
Beatles were erased from the world. So
yeah.
like there was already some kind of like something in my mind about that stuff anyways. Um, so yeah, I thought it was really cool because at first you think it's just John, and then Paul shows up, and then it's like them together, and then they hit the notes, and it worked for me. I got the little like chills kind of moment for this one. I'll admit it. Uh, so yeah, I thought that was cool. I like that.
Yeah, I think it was a fitting ending of Maestro. A good way for them to go out, and then you get the line that you've already referenced. The one who waits is almost here, and then Maestro's gone.
Yep. And that's where the episode should have definitely ended.
That's the second ending to the episode, right?
So
That I agree. That should be where things got closed up.
I'm not sure what happened. It does feel like Russell T Davis is like just trying to play around with some stuff and where he's kind of like, hey, what if I do this, and I feel like in this episode he was already skirting the edge of some silliness but then at the end he's like, oh, the doctor kind of breaks the fourth wall again, and now there's always a twist at the end, and then it goes into this musical number,
Yeah, yeah,
which you're just kind of like, okay, maybe it's a fun little ending that a lot of fans appreciated, and maybe it's just a pointless kind of cheesy thing that kind of overstepped the silliness. I tend to be on the side of that was not needed. I didn't need to add this extra injection of fun at the end for this episode to resonate for me. In fact, I think it may have taken away from kind of how cool the ending would have been if they didn't throw
yeah,
this in.
yeah. I again, we're on the same page. We're aligned. I thought there had to be this had to be a reference to something, right? Like I was convinced that this has to be some callback or a reference to something that I just didn't understand until you start to Google it and you realize that it really isn't a reference to anything. It really is just a song. Um, I don't get it. I really wish it wasn't there, but it happened, and we get Henry, we get Harbinger in the in a room in a hallway
Yeah.
looking amused. We get some characters that showed up in other places showing up again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
Cilla
think
Black is singing.
if
The
there's
two ladies in the
any
hallway.
if there's any kind of saving grace for that end part is if there's something from that is a hint to something else that's coming, and
Yeah,
we'll look back and be like, oh, that's what they were trying to tell us. But other than that, it was kind of pointless. The Harbinger we had talked about at the beginning of the episode, but yeah, the Harbinger character showing up too was a little bit eye-catching. Like, oh, okay, there is something they're trying to tell us with that at
right.
least. But beyond that,
I mean,
um,
is it simply just a callback to like a 60s, 70s movie where they randomly ended in song? Like, is
at
it
least
as simple
partially.
as that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, at least that's part of it. And it could be
okay.
all of it. Yeah, it could be all of that. That is just, hey, that's the way, movie and TVs was, then, and they're doing all the different scenes, and it kind of the callback to that time period, and it was just a fun little thing that Russell T Davis wanted to include. That's probably all it is. Yeah,
I
because
mean,
he can do whatever he wants.
right. If that's the case, I just like the breaking of the fourth wall and like there's always a twist at the end. It just felt like it had more meaning. There had to be something else there. Um, but
Well,
maybe
I'll
it's
point
not.
out the other thing I was a little disappointed is that the Beatles were in this and they didn't actually sing any Beatles stuff.
Yep.
Everything, with the cleverness of writing and how they did everything, they never had to because music was gone, so they didn't have their songs. And then by the end, they're singing this, always a twist at the end, and that's not one of their songs either. So even when they were doing the like, I thought there was going to maybe be a point where like there'd be a callback in the back in like the soundtrack or some of that kind of background music or something. Now, it could be as simple as you can't get the rights to play Beatles songs,
Right.
without paying a ton
That's
of money.
yeah.
But Disney being involved and the fact that Disney's just releasing a new documentary about the Beatles on Disney Plus, what better way to cross promote? Um, I was a little surprised. I kind of expected I didn't expect it to be full of Beatles music, but man, if you're going to give me a Beatles episode of Doctor Who, there better be some Beatles music in it. Like something. Give me a
The-
line.
I was gonna
Something.
say a line, a reference, like drop yeah,
Yeah, there
references
weren't
throughout
even
the
any
episode.
like references to titles of the songs.
Right.
Maybe I missed something, maybe there was, but yeah, I was a little disappointed that there wasn't a little bit more Beatles other than the fact that they, cast the characters and stuff and name,
Yeah.
their names and all that stuff. But the music, that's what I wanted to hear is a little bit of was music, and that was surprising and disappointing.
Yeah. Uh they did what they could. I'm sure. I'm sure they did. But I mean, yeah, I agree. That's it has to be pretty hard to get anything Beatles in an episode.
Maybe
Outside
we
of this.
should yeah, let's save this for the next episode because we obviously trying to get caught up. We're reviewing this one now, but we've already seen Boom
Yeah.
and we're ready to review that too. So we'll save this next, but I'll at least bring it up. All the talk around the recurring character that keeps showing up in the episodes, or have you missed that?
There's a oh crap. I've missed something.
Yes. So,
Is it the old lady from the church on Ruby Road? She's showing up everywhere. Was
so
she the
she,
tea lady?
so she's not from the church. Well, she's in that episode, but she's like in the crowd in the bar. She's also Sir Isaac
Oh
Newton.
dang. Oh
She's Sir Isaac Newton's like maid.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
She all
Okay.
Yeah. So she's
I didn't know
this
that she
recurring
showed up
character
in these ones.
she's been appearing in every episode.
Oh.
So she was the tea lady. She was, and then in Boom, she is also in the computer, and in Space Baby, she was one of the crew that was like in protest or whatever that left. Like she's also appears there. So she's shown up in every episode as a different character. Obviously, anytime you do that, there's going to be
Yeah.
crazy speculation as to what that means. Why does she keep
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
appearing? So yeah, that's a conversation. And now apparently this is news to you, so we won't discuss because she does show up in the next episode. So when we review Boom, we will maybe take some time to look into that a little bit and give our speculations on who she might be.
Dang. Okay.
I've heard
Cool.
some interesting theories. You know me, I don't like online theories. So most of the theories I've heard are kind of like way off the wall. Like, no, that's not going to be it. But everything from it's Susan, but they recast her to it's a future version of Ruby. So it's interesting to hear people kind
Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry. So like random yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna throw this out there, right? Like quick search of there's always a twist at the end. So
her
someone's
name,
like the name, her name is Susan Twist.
the
And someone's
actor's
like
name.
she's been yeah.
Yeah.
And she's been showing up at the end of every credit for the episodes. So there's always a twist at the end. Susan Twist always shows up as the last person on the credits. Um
I was thinking as far as like, is Susan Twist even a real person, or did they manufacture an actor to use this name just for this
I
purpose? Because that name, how much more
know,
perfect can that
right?
name be? Did you cast them just because their name is Susan Twist?
There's always a twist
Um,
at the end.
so yeah,
Oh
like
man,
I
this is
said,
great.
this is probably a bigger conversation. We probably already talked about it more than I wanted to, but yeah,
So I'll
look it up.
so back when the Church on Ruby Road uh
You just
aired.
you just set off balloons on the Zoom call.
Oh, did I really?
You were looking down and as they were going up, so you didn't see them.
I need to turn that off. No, so I do remember people referencing that there was a character that showed up in the crowd at the bar, and then she also showed up um in in another location within the first two episodes, and
Hmm.
people were already speculating about that. I did not even
Yeah.
recognize or realize that she's already shown up in these episodes as well.
Yep.
That is interesting. That is
I'm
intriguing.
surprised that I'm bringing this news to you because you're usually the one that's more dialed into like the online speculation. So the fact that I got to it
Yeah.
first, I'm kind of proud of myself, Adam.
I've been trying to avoid some of these things. I don't want to. This season is too good. I don't want to spoil it. There's too many mysteries that I'm like, okay, these ones are actually legitimately fun to keep track of. Um,
All right, well, we will end it there and then we will pick up the conversation with Boom, which has already been out. We're just behind an episode, so we will catch up and hopefully get both of those reviews out there this week so we can be kind of caught up for the next one as it comes out on Friday. Although we'll probably be late on that one too because I'm traveling and blah blah blah. So, life gets in the way, but we'll try to stay as up to date as we can with these reviews. But
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, until next time.
Don't mind us. Just cup of tea.